Well, when I was a little girl, I used to read a lot. I was around 8 years old, and I was running to the library every day, so back and forth all the time. And one day, the librarian told me, you know what, you can start reading the adult one, not the adult one, but the adolescent, right? Is it adolescent? The adolescent books, and I started reading. And there, on the top shelf, there was the books of the very famous author, very famous author, the biggest one. And I started reading, and I was overwhelmed of his writing, and I told the librarian, you know what, I want to write him a letter that I want to be an author as he is. And I was writing him a letter, and we sent the letter. So we waited, and I waited for his reply. It took quite a long time. And then one day I found in the mailbox his letter, and it was what was written over there. It was something like, "Dear Iris, I've read your interesting letter. I understand you want to be an author, but though, I found some spelling mistakes in your letter, and I think you must read a lot. You have to wait for a while until you can be a writer." But then I really think that this letter, it was quite an insulting one, but I believe that this letter, in that moment exactly, I knew that that's what I really want to do, and I'm willing to do everything to do that. I mean, even to wait a lot, and to read a lot of books and correct all my spelling mistakes and all that. And it was quite a great dream that I have back then, and I think that is kindly one of the moments that one of the moments that I knew that I'm going to be an author. I wanted to be an author. Well, again, I read a lot, and I love Israeli literature. I think that because it's kind of what is interesting me in my writing. And I would say David Grossman, who is just won the Man Booker Prize. And among the female authors, I would say Ronit Matalon, who is a great writer too. And I believe there's a lot of young voices rising and coming up, very interesting, very brilliant. And I read a lot of Israeli books. As I said before, I started writing novels. So the novel is very, I'm really familiar with the novels and the prose writing, storytelling. I think my best force. My force is in the telling story. אני אעשה את זה מחדש. I think the main thing that I'm really good in, it's telling stories. So the story, the novel is very familiar, but though I think poetry is much more insight writing, and much more complicated, and touching your wounded and your past and your childhood, and touches in really who you are. So the poetry is more, for me, is more is holding the truth, kind of holding the real truth, maybe even truth in plural. Well, since my first book, I was writing about the Israeli environment and the Israeli society. In Maktub, there was the Arab Jew love story, and in the second book, my second book is Dushin Kaneshama, which tell the story of Dima and Adas with Ukraine עולה חדש.
Immigrant.
Ukraine immigrant, and that's with Saber Israeli. And there's also a love story that combined the Russian culture. And the third book, my third novel is Galbi, which means my heart, and it talks about it presents the two main narratives, I would say, of the Israeli society, which is the Mizrahic narrative and the Ashkenazic narrative. The Mizrahic narrative, I mean, for the abduction of the Yemen kids back in the early 50s. And I would say that the Ashkenazic narrative would be the second generation of the Holocaust. And I mean, the books, all my books are discussing all these, kind of immigrations and the immigration literature. And the immigration problems and conflicts. So I would say this is the first thing that is really interesting me, the Israeli society. And within, if I would answer a question about the Mizrahic issue, I would say that I am a Mizrahik. My parents immigrated from South India in early 50s, from India to Israel, and they are considered a Mizrahik, but I think that except of my skin color, I'm not a real Mizrahi, because most of the Mizrahi Israelis, immigrants, came from the Arab countries. So first, I feel like that I'm like between the worlds of the immigrations, but still. I feel very attached to the Mizrahic society, because I grew up among a lot of Mizrahic and Arab immigrants, Jewish Arab immigrants. So this is the first thing that I think I'm kind of very attached to this issue. And still, if we're talking about what was important for me to talk about among these issues, are the Mizrahic women within the Mizrahic society, and my main characters are always Mizrahic. The female characters are always as much as very like me, and they're all Mizrahic women, and they're all anti-stereotype, because they are all they have their own job, and they have their own prestige, and it was very important to me for me to do that, because of the stereotype that are used to be, considered in Israel towards Mizrahic women, which in a lot of literature books, a lot of books, my previous authors and mainly describe the women, the female Mizrahic women, the female Mizrahic, as a very weak one and very תלותית. And unindependent and not independent, and my characters are especially, that's what I really insist of it, is to make a different type of women in my literature. So I think this is my if I can say my my thing in this Mizrahic. But still, I said, like, if people ask me, are you a Mizrahic author? I said, usually, no, I'm not, because I don't want to be like it's kind of a jail to be in this, under this title, Mizrahic author. I'm not. I'm a writer. I'm an author and I'm a poet, and I love to do that, and I love to write about everything, but not just of this issues, and there's kind of expectations from the Mizrahic authors to write about only these Mizrahic issues. So. Well, I think as most of Israelis, I didn't really believe that this thing had really happened. I mean, the Yemen kids abductions. I couldn't believe that something like that could have happened in Israel. And I was very skeptic. And as most of Israelis, I mean, until late 90s, no one really believed something like that. I remember the Uzi Meshulam thing, which, איך אומרים פרשה? I believe most of the Israelis remember the Uzi Meshulam story, which he was the first one to said, people, there is no one or two or not even 100 kids that were kidnapped, but 1,000, and maybe even it's close to 5,000 kids. And everybody said, oh, okay, come on, it's not logical, and it can't be something like that. And then one day when I finished writing my two first novels, Maktub and Dushinka, I start just, looking at the internet and trying to find something new to write on. And by completely accident, though, as my first book name, Maktub, I really don't believe that that things can just happen. I mean, by accident, I really believe things are supposed to be happen. So I was. There was no intention to do that, but though I saw a movie about Uri Vechtel, who is a young, who in the movie he was 40 years old, and he was kidnapped when he was a child from his family, and his mother and his sister, his father passed away, but his mother and his sisters were looking for him for years and years and years, and they didn't find him. And then one day his sister found him in Kiryat Ono in an Ashkenazic family, and it was like 20 years ago, like he was 40, so it was maybe 30 years after he was kidnapped, and it was completely shock, not for them of course, but it was for me, because I saw it and I said, all these stories are not false stories. There's a true story. And then I said one more movie and another one, another testimonies of these mothers that their children were taken for them, and I was shocked. And then I would start writing this thing, and I really believe that Galbi tells the story of the Israeli a society, not the Yemen. It's not a Yemen story, but an Israeli story. And I think this story should have been, told all over the world, and especially in Israel. I mean, a lot of Israelis do not believe that something like that happened on our land, on Holy Land, and that's why I wrote Galbi. And I really believe that this is, if I can say that, is there any mission of this book? This is the mission, to spread this story all over. And I believe it did so a lot. I think that is why I'm here now, right? As I said, it took me a lot of time to like maybe kind of 40 years to discover that I am a writer, and but since then I'm just writing all the time, and I'm writing. Like I have like 5 books in 6 years or 7 years, and it's kind of a dream that came true. And I don't have any dreams yet. beside that one. And I really love to write, and I really hope that's, that's what I'll do for good. Just writing and writing and telling stories.